In this video, I will demonstrate how to sew on a wire hook, bar, and loop. Like other hardware, they come in different colors and sizes depending on the needs of your project. We are going to use size number 3. No matter what size, wire hooks are all sewn in a similar fashion. Hooks are placed about 1/8 inch in from the edge of the fabric. The entirety of the loop is sewn around, about 6 stitches per side. Your needle will then tunnel through to the end of the hook and wrap around that about 3 or 5 times so that it doesn't pull away from your project. The wire bar is positioned as needed for your project to close. Sew around each loop, tunneling through the layers of fabric to the next hole. Keep in mind that the hook and bar are closures and that they're doing a job. They have to be sewn on securely using those small pinprick stitches to the reverse side. This is the wire loop. It is placed so it extends past the edge of your fabric. Stitch as before, wrapping around each loop. This placement allows the fabric to butt, the edges to meet, and not overlap as with the bar. The hook and bar are sewn as marked between pieces 3 and 5 on your sampler. I have drawn a horizontal line here so I know where to place my hook. You can also give yourself an end mark so you know where it should stop. Use a double strand of thread, waxed and knotted. To sew on the hook, keep it in place in the center of that line by holding it between your thumb and your forefinger. Start at the top of that first loop by taking a stitch from the outside up through the center. Continue around the loop. I am taking small bites, wrapping around the loop and grabbing the fabric all at once. This can also be done in 2 steps by pushing your needle through to the opposite side, taking a small stitch on the reverse and coming up through the center of the loop. Once you have finished the first loop, move on to the second one and repeat as before. Always check to make sure your hook is centered and that your stitches on the reverse side are nice and small. With that second loop complete, to finish the hook, tunnel between the layers of fabric to the end of the hardware. Here I'm checking the reverse side to make sure my long stitch didn't go through. Bring that thread across the inside of the hook to the opposite side. Keeping as close to the hardware as possible, stitch through to the reverse side. Take a small stitch on the reverse, coming up and wrap again. Repeat this about 3 or 5 times. Now it is time to knot off your thread. Grab some of your previous stitches, forming a loop with your thread. Take that needle through the loop and pull. Repeat as necessary for strength. You can now hide that thread tail between your layers of fabric or cut it close to the knot. Mark your bar placement on piece number 5 by lining up piece number 4 so that the two pieces are the same size as your other pages. This will be approximately just inside that 1-inch stitching line. The center of your bar will match the center of your hook. Mark a horizontal line as well as a center line. If it helps, center that bar and mark the top and the bottom. As before, use a double strand of thread, waxed and knotted. Starting is tricky. Hold that bar between your thumb and your forefinger. Take a small stitch coming up through the center of the loop. As before, stitch all the way around the loop, making sure you have small stitches on the reverse side. When you have finished sewing around that loop, it will be about 5 or 6 stitches. You're going to tunnel through to the other side. Come up through the center of the loop and finish your bar by stitching around that side. Knot off as before. Take a stitch through some of your old threads, leave a loop, pull that thread through the loop, and repeat as necessary. Hide your thread tail between the layers of fabric or trim the tail close to the knot. Check the closure to make sure it is sewn on correctly and that the stitches are strong and hold. And lastly, the loop. A second hook and a loop will be sewn between pieces 3 and 5 on your sampler. The wire loop is made up of 3 parts: the big loop the hook fits through and the 2 smaller loops you sew. Position the hardware so that the big loop sticks out over the edge and the 2 smaller loops are directly in from the edge of the fabric. Use a double strand of thread, waxed and knotted. Mark as before by giving yourself a center line. Starting is always tricky. Hold the loop between your thumb and your forefinger, making sure you are keeping it centered on that mark, and that the large part of the loop is sticking over the edge of the fabric. In this case, I'm going to start by hiding my knot under the seam allowance of my fabric. And sometimes the knot doesn't hold and the thread pulls out. Tie a new knot and start over. Starting is always the trickiest part. Hold the hardware in place between your thumb and your forefinger. I am hiding the knot of my thread between my seam allowance layers by bringing it up through the middle of the loop. Sew around the loop as before. Always check the reverse side to make sure your stitches are nice and small. Finish sewing on the hardware by stitching around the second loop. Knot the thread as before. Grab some of your previous stitches and leave a loop. Thread the needle through the loop and pull tight. Repeat as needed for strength. You can see that this hardware is sewn correctly. The loop is sticking off the edge and the stitches are sewn nice and small. Hide the thread tail in the seam allowance or cut the tail next to the knot. Your project is complete once you have checked that your hardware closes correctly and securely.